Jayme Smithers with Thoughtexchange. I'm joined and very pleased to be joined here with Lisa McLeod, founder of McLeod More. And I'm your host today. So we're going to go through a couple ground rules first, or ground principles, I'll say, and get us started. So number one, I like to go with what I call as the last slide first. Also, one of our sales enablement people here at Thoughtexchange always starts with what's the key objectives of what you can expect from the session. So there's three key things that we're going to leave you with today. Number one, I promise to give you, with Lisa's help, and actually primarily from Lisa, a tremendous amount of insights on newfound thinking and insight of what selling with noble purpose is and how that can have an impact and profound impact on you in your career and your organizations. Number two, you'll make some new meaningful connections. And number three, you'll walk away with some inspiration to take immediately into your organization. So without further ado, again, I'm Jayme Smithers. That was the last slide first. Lisa McLeod has joined me here, and I'm going to give you a little bit of intro about Lisa, and then we're going to jump right into the first activity, which is this is a different type of a virtual event. We're going to get your participation right off the hop. So a little bit about Lisa. So Lisa's been working in this field for about 19 years, I think her website says, 19 to 20 years. She's an author of 5 best-selling books. The 2 most notable ones that we're going to be speaking today is Leading and Selling with Noble Purpose, which are phenomenal. They've had a profound impact on others, and she'll explain a little bit about what that means. But really at the core of what I think about that, she's done some work with our organization here at Thoughtexchange as well, is around thinking about head and heart and how that can give you that competitive edge over your competition, and really focus in on the most important thing is your customer, and your customer centricity of how you're making an impact will drive that impact internally in your organization. So Lisa, also some interesting facts. She works with, I think it's been 120 different, I would say Fortune 100, but maybe they were in the Fortune 100 at one point and then they've moved in or around or out, but very large organizations from Google to Cisco to LinkedIn to Volvo to many other key organizations across the world. In addition, a notable fact here, I don't know if this is a notable one, maybe it's in the old-timey world, she had 134 6 a.m. flights. So as we get good at sleuthing here at Thoughtexchange, you find out some interesting facts. So Lisa, welcome. I'm so pleased to be doing this presentation with you, and we're going to jump right into it. So I think we're going to have some fun.
Excellent. No 6 a.m. flight today. I never thought I'd miss those. I do a little bit.
So without further ado, I'm going to launch our first activity, and that is an exchange. We'll get everybody participating. Again, let's see here. I should be able to see this. I'm going to go into presentation mode. As your host, I'm going to present, so you're seeing a little bit of behind the scenes. And we will start the clock. And the first question that we have is, what is the hardest part about staying purpose-driven in your organization? No wrong answers here. 3 steps that we're going to ask you to do. So first of all, just pull out your phone. Drew will put in the link into the chat. If you haven't already done that, you can click on the link in the chat and then participate in the exchange, or just pull out your camera. I encourage you to do that. Actually, first pull out your camera, hover over that QR code. The website will pop up, and then we will ask you there that same question. What is the hardest part about staying purpose-driven? Just press participate, press accept, press OK, and then share your first thought. So what is the hardest part about staying purpose-driven? What is your thought and why that is important to you? Share multiple thoughts if you want. And then we're going to go from there. And once you've rated or you've shared one thought, we're going to jump into ratings. And the ratings are quite simple in that 5, you wholeheartedly agree with that other person's thought, or 1, you disagree. And then we're going to explore some of those thoughts real time as we jump right into this conversation. Lisa, before we switch over, love staying true to purpose when you need revenue today. long-term strategy. Any additional comments, thoughts, understanding your true purpose and getting in the org-wide into commitment of it?
Mm-hmm.
Have a quota. Having a quota carrying role purpose is great on my mindset, but leadership doesn't want excuses for not making my numbers.
Yeah.
Being in numbers-driven organizations, it's hard to think about purpose when it's only about the numbers.
You know, one thing, so I'll speak to the quagmire in just a second of the purpose versus the numbers, but one thing that this illustrates is that people really understand the difference between your true North Star and your purpose as a company versus your short-term revenue goals. So these comments illustrate that people understand there is a difference between those two things. And the challenge that people are facing here is one that leaders face every day in ordinary circumstances, and in today's time, even more, because its purpose is on my mind, but leadership doesn't want excuses for not making my numbers. Anyone from the CEO could be saying that about what the market's telling him or her versus a frontline seller. That is the challenge, is to keep this sense of purpose alive while you're hitting your numbers at the same time. Are you experiencing that, Jayme?
Yes, of course. I think I may have sent a text earlier today to my leadership team with 2 days to go into the left in September in the quarter.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So without further ado, thank you. That's the first exchange. We're going to do one more exchange after, but I'd like to turn it over to Lisa to take us through some thoughts and going deeper into what is this all about? What is selling with noble purpose, and how can we wrap our brains around this?
Right.
So, Lisa,
so what I want to step into, thanks, Jayme. What I want to step into right now is how to tackle this quagmire that has been presented in the exchange. We want higher purpose. We know higher purpose drives results, but yet the urgency of now is around the numbers. And so I want to give you a couple ways to think about this. And I want to start with the number. And this was a number pre-pandemic. 68% of people are not emotionally engaged at work. And what happened was we knew that this was a challenge. Any organization who's had disengaged employees, anybody who's worked with a disengaged peer knows that there is a business cost to this. And while this felt important pre-pandemic, it didn't feel urgent. So what I would suggest to you is now this problem is urgent, because you've got a lot of employees, particularly those that are in a revenue producing capacity, that if they are disengaged, you are going to have a big problem 6 months from now. And just to put a definition on engage, what we mean is, and perhaps you all can relate to this, when you wake up and every day just feels like a rinse and repeat of the last day. And here we go again, here we go again. So connecting the dots between that and the quagmire that you all just posed, when every day feels like we got to hit the number, we got to hit the number, we got to hit the number. When the pandemic first hit, people are going to be energized. They're going to say, okay, we can do this, we can do this. But now, as this repetitive rinse and repeat starts to take hold, it's going to be very challenging for sales teams, because if your sales teams aren't emotionally engaged, they're not going to be able to emotionally engage customers. So I want to give you a framework for how clarity about your purpose, I call it noble purpose, how that can help you and how that can help you bring together this emotional engagement that you need with your employees and what you need to drive revenue and how they go together. And so I'm going to tell you a story. And this is about a study we did where we first discovered just what a big deal noble purpose, as we now call it, was, and how it drives revenue. This was about 10 years ago. My firm was hired by a big biotech company to do a study of their sales team. And the point of the study was to identify what differentiated the top sales performers. And by differentiated, what I mean is everyone can see who the top sales performers are numbers wise, but what were the things that went into that? And if you've ever had any experience with sales, you know that the difference between poor performance and good performance is pretty easy to pinpoint. It's pretty easy to spot. We know what it looks like. We know how to coach it. We know how to train it. But the difference between good performance and exceptional performance is harder to put your finger on. So That was what this biotech company wanted us to study. And they had us do this as a double-blind study. And what I mean by that is myself and the other consultants, researchers that went out in the field didn't know who the top performers were. So we went out to work with a bunch of their salespeople. Some were good performers and some were top performers. There were no poor performers. And so the idea was to see if we could spot something that maybe the leaders at the biotech firm missed. So we're out with these salespeople, watching them make calls, listening in on their calls, taking notes. How many questions did they ask? All the things that you try to analyze when you look at sales behavior. How many questions? How long did they talk? And they're biotech, so they call them doctors and other healthcare professionals. And it was all in search of that elusive thing. What's that magic elixir that makes the top people the top people? And so we were near the end of the study. And I was with this one particular representative in Phoenix, Arizona. And I happened to ask a question. And I asked it because I was sitting at the airport. She was dropping me off. It was hot as hell. And I didn't want to get out of the car and schlep myself up to the airport, you know? So I decided to ask her one more question as I'm sitting there in the air conditioning. And I asked her, what do you think about? What's in your head? What do you think about when you go on sales calls? And this question wasn't on our list. She kind of looks around the car, she turns to me and she says, well, I don't tell this to very many people. And I'm thinking, well, this is going to be really good. She said, I always think about this one particular patient. She said, I was standing in one of my doctor's offices. I was new to the job about 2 years ago. I was staying in the doctor's office, had my name badge. You know, if you're a rep, you got your name badge. So I stood out. She said, this little old lady came up to me and said, excuse me, miss, are you the representative for this drug? She said, I looked down at her and said, yes, ma'am, I am. She said, the lady looked up and said, well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for giving me my life back. Because prior to taking this, I couldn't go anywhere or do anything. Now I can get on a plane. I can fly across the country. I can visit my grandkids and I can get down on the floor to play with them. So thank you for giving me my life back. And as this sales representative is telling me this story, she's getting kind of emotional. And I found myself getting emotional, you know, listening to her. And she said, you know, that's my higher purpose. That's why I do this job. I carry her in my heart, that grandmother, every single day. So I get on the plane, fly back to Atlanta where I live. And I just kept turning it over and over in my head. I just kept thinking about this higher purpose. So I went back to all the interviews that we had. And I started searching for it. And I found it. I found it in the representative who said, my father was a doctor. That's a harder job than people realize. I found it in the representative who said, you know, I'm so excited about the science. I can't wait to share it. So all told, I found 5 people who had this sense of something bigger than themselves. So at the end of the study, the biotech company said, who do you think the top performers are? I said, I think it's these 5. And I was 100% right. And that one representative was the #1 representative in the country, the one who talked about the grandmother. And so that for me was a tipping point that really changed the way I started to look at what the leader's job was in business. And as I'm telling you this, you're probably not surprised. And the thing that was interesting was at the time that I discovered this, the biotech company, I said, I think these are the top. And I was right. And they're like, she's magic. How did you know? And at the time, I didn't have a great answer. I said, well, they had this sense of a higher purpose. They had a different story in their heart. And so you can imagine the people that work for a biotech company are the leadership team is scientists and finance people. And I'm talking about a different story in your heart. So they weren't that engaged. Okay, she's a crazy lady. But I have named the top 5 people. So I'm going to flash forward and tell you what this has to do with you on a daily basis. What we now know 10 years later is we've figured out a couple things. And one of them is there are some economics of this. That story that I spotted in her heart actually translates into economic results. Organizations with clarity about their purpose, who have a purpose bigger than money, outperform the market by over 350%. And what's really important here is when you are clear on your purpose and you make it the center of everything you do, you outperform the market. The other thing that happens from a customer engagement standpoint is when companies are guided by a higher purpose, they actually, and the purpose doesn't have to be cure cancer. You don't have to be a biotech company. Your purpose can simply be about improving the way your customers do business. And when you have that and you have clarity, you produce better quality products, you get more customer engagements. And here's the thing that's interesting when we asked about the quagmire at the beginning. A recent study from Michigan State University, when you have a sense of purpose as a seller, it's more positively associated with effort, adaptability. So you're more resilient. And the difference can be said in, it's about the story that you tell yourself. And is the story, I'm here to close the deal? Or is the story, I'm here to make a difference to the customer? And so Jayme, in your role as an executive, when you think about those two stories that someone could have in their head, who do you want calling on you?
That person that cares.
Yeah, the person that cares. And I think one of the difference is that a lot of people have talked over the years about customer centricity. And the thing about selling with noble purpose that's very different is it's not just about pleasing the customer, it's about improving the customer. And one of the things that indicates your ability to do that as a leader is the questions that you ask. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions now.
Oh, geez.
This is what we call the game-changing question. This is, how will the customer be different as a result of doing business with us? And so I want to ask you some questions now.
Sure.
We've talked, this gives you the idea of selling with noble purpose is about you and everyone on your team being able to answer this fundamental question. How will the customer be different as a result of doing business with us? That goes beyond pay attention to the customer, listen to the customer, do what's best for the customer. All those things are great, but this is clarity of purpose, is your ability to articulate this. And so one of the things you and I have talked about is, and I think will be helpful for other people to hear, is the difference between the creative brain and the survival brain, and how those two things play out in the marketplace. So I wanted to get your perspective on that.
Well, maybe I'll first say that just thank you for the first portion, and second, it's why I came to this company in the first place. And I didn't quite know it. Like, I knew I wanted to make a bigger difference, and then actually hearing our customer stories and then seeing similarly about who was excelling in our own organization. That same type of word of noble purpose really resonates with me. And I glommed onto stories from a superintendent that was able to bring two communities that never would speak to each other, that through the platform, they not only spoke to each other, they connected with each other now in the supermarket. They had understanding of what points of view they were coming from, which were considerably different to theirs. He was a superintendent of 27 years in this district. Never before did he see these two groups come together like this before. And then it impacted his career. They passed a bond. He was able to move to the next kind of aspiration of he was going to do. And similar, as I look at a tech company that we recently worked with, this tech company, early adopters is an idea of actually asking, being anonymous and reaching out and being inclusive with your staff. We've been working with him for a year. A year later, he gets promoted and gets the big job. Why? I think I'd argue because he included people for the process. They made him better. They removed or he was shown hidden opportunities that he didn't know, blind spots in his organization, and he became a better leader, and his team became more higher performing through that. So I just wanted to hit on those. It was really like when you talk about noble purpose and the impact there. I'll get to creative brain, survival brain, but that's it. And I think the hardest thing we talk about creative brain, survival brain. I'm not sure if it's worldwide. I wasn't quite aware of creative brain, survival brain until I came into Thoughtexchange. We have the good fortune of having an amazing executive coach that helps name things for us. And so we can see people in our organization that are struggling with things, and we'll call that survival brain. And so we call it out. And what we know to be true is that when we're in creative brain, when we're in that removing ego in creative brain, thinking about the possibilities, thinking about the impact, thinking about what is possible, we tend to perform at our absolute best. So, and we were actually at a recent all company meeting, and somebody said, yeah, you have to name it before you tame it. And so it's just further language to creative brain. Survival brain is us giving us this language to call things out, to help support each other, to create systems to allow us to achieve our absolute best.
Well, you bring up a good point, and I hope those listening to this are really understanding. I want to draw a real clear path here. Is the narrative of business is about numbers. The default is always going to be about the numbers, about what's the ROI, what's the revenue, what's the profit, what are the efficiency metrics. They're on the spreadsheets, they're the KPIs. And those have to exist for a reason. We have to hit those. But those don't create the differentiation. And when you talk about the creative brain versus the survival brain, one of the things I want leaders to understand is if you're getting all this pressure from, let's go all the way upstream, publicly held company, you're in the market, you're getting all this pressure on earnings. That translates down to the CEO. That translates down to the chief revenue officer. That translates down to the sales managers. That lands on your seller's head. And the difference between a seller who is able to show up with authenticity and help the customer versus a transactional seller is when that seller is hearing, close it, close it, close it, close it, close it, hit the numbers, hit the numbers, hit the numbers, that puts that seller in survival mode. And actually the data tells us lessens their ability to close the deal. Versus a seller, and you gotta have smart people to do this, versus a seller that hears this is about providing value to the customer, figure out how we can help the customer and charge accordingly. Because people often create that false quagmire. Was it supposed to be about the purpose, or is it supposed to be about the money? The money follows the purpose. But the money, if you emphasize the money alone, you drive that lizard brain type thinking. If you emphasize the purpose, you get creative thinking. And so how you came up in traditional business in many ways, how do you make that shift to this way of higher level thinking when everything in the business is calling you numbers, 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 numbers? How do you
connections like this?
Huh?
Another actually great customer of ours, partner of ours, said close to knowing, open to learning. So they hired me as a senior executive to help drive and hit performance and hit numbers. I came from Oracle, I came from SAP, et cetera, and I have a finance background. And so, and there was actually this video on your testimony, one of your testimonies is from a CEO, and the CEO had that, which was like, hey, I had to lead with numbers, I had to lead with head. But what I realized, and I read the first couple of pages, and he read leading with purpose. Leading with noble purpose. He said, this is what I've been trying to articulate. I've never been able to figure it out. Now I can actually get it. And when you can just bring in heart into it and you gave him tools around it, it was like the numbers worked for themselves. And if I reflect back to my ski racing days, yes, I'd have aspirations to win a race, et cetera. But what I did day in and day out and why I did that made all the difference. If I focused in on how I was tracking from an outcome perspective always, I'd automatically get into survival brain. I would be focusing, ego would be turned on. I'd be comparing myself to others. And when our ego is turned on, we're not performing at our absolute best. If you think about your kids, when are they in bliss? When nobody is interfering with them and they're playing and they're having a good time. They're not comparing themselves. They're not thinking about other things. They're just focusing in on the thing, that the task at hand. So we've really tried to focus in on this idea of not only being open to learning and having that great people to help me think differently, and that give me the space to actually do that. But now we've just furthered it, which is how do we not only focus in on purpose-led first, then we're performance-driven. So we're still thinking about what are the most important things we should be doing, and then doing it from a health based, if you will. We think about those three pillars, we know that we can hit breakthrough performance, and there's additional things out of that. But that's the thing that we focus in on, that we can control the most. It keeps us in creative brain, moving away from survival brain. So I think to answer the question is like great people around me that have opened my eyes to continue to lead differently. And I just continue to then seek them out. I was working with a executive from a company called Shopify. We were jamming the other day just about, we should do things like, I think there's a traditional way to do it, and it's not the way, and even more probably in the crisis, is probably not the best way to actually lead this moment. So.
Well, that's the thing that the crisis has amplified. And I want to draw folks' attention to a couple things that you've said here that are really important. When you said the purpose and then the performance metrics, and you did an ordering thing there that I think is really crucial. And you mentioned that CEO who's on our website. It's a guy named Doug Williams. He's the CEO of Atlantic Capital Bank. And he said something. He said, I realize I need to lead to the purpose, but manage to the numbers. Mm-hmm. And when you're leading to the purpose, that is about how you make a difference to customers. And one of the things that I recommend for folks is that you get absolutely clear and name and claim your noble purpose. In that particular bank, they said, we fuel prosperity. And so if you think about, you've got two bankers, and one banker has their manager whispering in their ear, cross-sell, 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 close it, close it, close it. And the other banker has their boss say, their CEO saying, your job is to fuel prosperity for this client. Go figure out how you can do that. Well, the Fuel Prosperity people were a Bank of the Year and were on the cover of American Banker. So they made money because they were making a difference. And that's, I think, what you've articulated here. But one of the things that I think is that we need to address right now is these are some timeless principles that have been true pre-pandemic. But we are now, and more than just pandemic, we are now in a time of potential financial crisis, social upheaval, health crisis. So why does this become more important, or does it become more important at this moment in time when we've got all of these additional inputs coming to our people and our customers, and in many situations, we don't have the capacity to be together to process them. They're coming to us alone in our home via Zoom. So why does purpose then become more important, or does it?
Yeah, I think you're probably the expert more than me on that one, but
from a CEO's perspective.
I have a colleague of mine. We've worked together at previous companies. We're working together now, and we've earned a really strong connection over the years, and trust, and we go through ups and downs. And so there's an example where we went through a down. She called me out on it and had the confidence to call me out on it. And I learned from that particular scenario. And the follow-on conversation she said to me was, in times of crisis, it's really critical. It's probably the most critical thing that we can do is really focus and understand our purpose. Because if we don't, we'll end up in survival brain, and we won't make a difference. We won't make the impact there. So if I'm reflecting back, we had a crisis in March. We had the lowest revenue that we've had probably as a company over the last 3 years. Probably many of the organizations on the planet did. And then we quickly assessed that, had introspection. I've heard you use that word with your clients before. And we thought, what could we actually do at this particular moment? And we first addressed psychological safety, what are our current challenges that we need to address? And then we started to work our way up Maslow's hierarchy of needs to get into what could be possible. And we launched our platform for free. Keep people connected was the purpose. We knew that we could actually, as a platform, get people more connected. And it's always been our mission to bring people together. And that ended up having a massive spike in our usage. We were up, and we've been up now trending between 300 to 600% year over year growth. And the revenue wasn't following suit just yet, but we knew we were doing the right thing for our prospects, for our customers, for the market. And you could see the whole shift in our organization of the purpose from crisis to that purpose came through. It was like, we are bringing people together. Right. And the confidence then grew. And guess what followed? The revenue went up in April and in May, and in June we had our greatest month of all time, and then in July and in August, and it just kept going in that same confidence. But it also takes work. Then those cycles like, ooh, it's tough. Something happens, it's another tough. You have to practice on that and make sure you're helping people stay in creative brain, bring those stories of purpose. Oh, I forgot about that, the little old lady that I helped. Oh shoot, shame on me. Like, we got her to see her family I stopped telling that story. I need to keep, like you have to keep practicing. You don't just have it once and then you have it for life. It's like, oh, things come in and out. So you have to continue to practice.
Well, this is such an important point, and I called you the CEO, so Freudian slip.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'll take it. Yeah, one of the things that you're, as the chief revenue officer, though, one of the things I want to draw folks' attention to is that the revenue is always a lagging indicator.
Mm.
And you don't want to lead to a lagging indicator. And when you talk about keeping that story alive, when that sales rep was telling me that story, at the time I thought, if I can bottle this, it's magic. I didn't know it was going to take a decade. But when she's telling me that story, her frontal lobes are lighting up. She is literally the smartest version of herself because she's got this higher purpose. And what happens is, it's not just getting the story once. It's reinforcing and sharing the story over and over again. It's like, you don't want your spouse to say, I love you once. Up, check the box. Now you know, we can move along. You know, you want that story over and over again. And so when you talk about bringing that to life and having the strategic discipline as a leader to say, here's our purpose, activating it in the hearts and minds of your people with the stories, and then saying, how can we live it in the marketplace? The revenue will follow. If you've got your business model set up right, the revenue will follow. So I want to ask for a volunteer now, because we've talked about some strategic high level things. I want to show you an example of what anyone who's on this call who is a revenue leader in any way, whether you are front facing with the customer, whether you're the chief revenue officer, or you're the CEO of a revenue driven company. I want to give you an example of how you as a leader can point your team towards a higher purpose that will have an immediate effect on the very next sales call they make. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer. I think folks were scouring behind the scenes, and I think we have one. This is my pause. Okay.
Hi.
Okay, you're going to be our volunteer. You're from Thoughtexchange. And what I want folks to do, so thank you for volunteering, is I'm going to ask you about an opportunity. And I'm going to show the group here how to lead to the numbers and how to lead to the purpose. Okay? And I'm pronouncing your name right, Kai?
Yes, fabulous.
Okay. So tell me, you've got an opportunity coming up.
I do, yes.
Tell me.
So this opportunity, it's near and dear to my heart. It's a large school district in rural Canada.
Okay.
And they have a really big FNMI population. So First Nations, Métis, and Inuit identified folks. And they are coming up for renewal in November.
Okay, so they're coming up for renewal. So now I'm going to play typical sales manager, and I'm going to do this two ways. First, I'm going to do it the traditional way, and then I'm going to do it the other way. And I want you just to, you know, Kai, just go with the flow. So you've got this revenue opportunity. How much revenue is at stake here? What's the renewal worth?
Yeah, it's a little less than 50K. It's about 48.
Okay, so $48,000 deal. Is there any way you can make that deal bigger?
We might have a small opportunity to make it about 18,000 bigger.
Okay, so it could be closer to 70,000.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have all the decision makers in the room?
We've got the decision makers. They're newly appointed. We are talking to the superintendent and the assistant superintendent for finance.
Okay. When do you anticipate closing this?
I think we're going to get it close to the end of November, so near when their renewal date comes.
Close to the end of November. What help do you need from me in getting this deal over the line?
I would need your help in getting some language around how we could properly upsell and then putting that into a multi-year contract for them.
Okay, so our goal here is multi-year contract and the upsell. Okay,
Yeah.
So you said it's what, 48,000 plus maybe another 18. Okay, so let me do some quick math on that. Okay, so we could be at like 66,000. Is it recurring revenue, or are they going to pay all at once?
It's going to be paid annually, and if we can do the multi-year, then we're locked in for.
And we're locked in. Okay, so we have an opportunity for $66,000 here. That's great. Okay, that's a traditional way a manager would coach. Who do you need to get? I could ask some more questions. Who's the competition, the decision makers? But now I'm going to try it a different way. And I want you to notice in this first way what we were focused on. We were focused on $66,000 and how fast we could get it. Now I'm going to ask Kai one question. As you look at this customer, if they decide to do this, how will they be different as a result of doing business with us?
It's a great question. I think that in this case, they're really showing up as leaders because one of their big strategic priorities is equity because of this FNMI population that they're representing. And I think that by working with us, it's a chance to step into those brave conversations, and that they would be able to show that they're implementing that strategic priority that's creating some more sustainable change, maybe at that cultural level that I hear them really asking for in these conversations.
So their strategic priority is equity. Who set that priority?
That was set in conversation with their community. So a couple of years ago, they drafted that one.
What does that mean to them, equity?
It's another good question. For them, it means building trust with folks who haven't felt like they've trusted the district for a long time, and giving those voices a chance to be part of the decision.
So if they could improve the trust and that feeling of equity, what would that do for them as an organization?
Their goal is student success. And right now, especially with the pandemic, as you talked about really well, that's so different for so many people. And I think feeling like these folks can't trust the leaders to ask for these resources and get the resources is impeding them in seeing full student success.
Full student success. How many students do they have?
They've got 48,000 students.
Okay. So success for 48,000 people. Okay. So do they have any parameters around what student success looks like and how the students having a voice plays into that success?
Yeah, they talk a lot about how they want each child to have both success in terms of learning, but then also emotional success. And one of the ways that they've been chatting about doing that is making sure that people feel invited to the table and then asked for their voice when they are actually at the table.
What happens if they fail, if they don't create that equity?
I think especially in this moment, it's going to bring them back many years of building that trust.
Okay. Who owns this at the end of the day in their organization? Who has the most to win and who has the most to lose if they can achieve this? If you don't know, that's okay. We can try and find out.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of the parents of having the most to win for their children's success, and then the administrators actually winning in terms of accomplishing their goals as professionals.
Okay. So we could go down this path. What I want you to notice is, Kai, where was your brain the first time? Where was your brain the second time?
I was trying to give you the concrete information the first time.
About the deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the focus was on us and our deal. When are you going to close it? How much is it going to be? And variations on that. The second time, I noticed that you paused and you went, oh, that's a challenging question. Where was your brain the second time?
I felt like I really had to think back to our conversations with them, put myself in their shoes, access more of an empathy piece of what do they need, what do they want. And I felt a little bit more creative in how I was trying to answer that.
Yeah. And so it all started with this one question. I flipped it, and we call it the game-changing question. It is the crux and essence of selling with noble purpose. So instead of just asking you about the deal, and if I was your sales manager, I would ask you about the deal and I'd get all that out of the way and get it done. We need to know. Then I would say, how will the customer be different as a result of doing business with us? And if you ask your sellers that question, it will affect them for the positive on the very next sales call. And what I would suggest is, Kai had some really good answers. And obviously when she said this is near and dear to my heart, I knew that she was we didn't plan this in advance, but I didn't even know what she was going to talk about. But when she said this is near and dear to my heart, I suspected that she would have some good answers to that. If I asked that question, how will this customer be different? And she didn't give me a good answer, that tells me as a coach, we're not quite ready to make the pitch yet. So it does two things for you. It points your seller's brain in the right direction and it will make them more compelling to the customer. And it also tells you as a leader, what's the likelihood of this actually closing, which is the thing we're always trying to find out when we do, when are you going to close it? How much is it going to be? But those just give you the seller's perceptions. When the seller says, how will the customer be different? She had a great story. She's very dialed into these folks. If she didn't, I'd go, yeah, I don't know if we're going to close this or not. And so the reason I use this example to illustrate is selling with noble purpose operates at the macro and the micro. We just did it at the micro. At the macro, at the higher level, it is about having your entire organization pointed towards your version of we fuel prosperity, or I'm helping the grandmother see her grandkids, and then activating that at every level. At the micro, which you can do right now, it's asking your sellers this question. That single question will make them more compelling to the customer because they're going in with a better story.
You could just see the shift.
Mm-hmm.
Kai cares
Yeah.
deeply. I know that she's one of our top people selling with purpose. Absolutely. But you could just see how that line of questioning, you just shifted her into heart, like head and heart of now she's going to come with, as she said, empathy, thinking about that. And it's not easy out there right now, which is why I'd like to back to your other question, why noble purpose is even more important is because sellers more than ever are getting no. I don't have budget. I don't have this. And so we've been fortunate enough to have more wind at our sails than maybe many organizations, and through a technology that's doing digital transformation, et cetera, and helping bring people together. But still, it's not easy. It's really, really difficult out there.
It's challenging.
So tapping into that like heart of what will be different after, she'll go into that conversation being like, here's what I heard. Here's what I think is going to be different after. It's really powerful, Lisa.
Well, one of the things I want to draw folks' attention to, and someone said that asking questions that are customer centered, the questions you ask your salespeople are going to be the questions they ask the customer. And so it did two things. It created this empathy heart thing, but if you also notice, it also made her very strategically aligned to their goals, because I didn't just want her to feel what they feel and lean into compassion. That's great. But I also wanted to, if you notice, I teased out some things. How many students do they have? So we got 48,000 students. Who owns that success for those students? What are the implications if they fail? So she is very focused on how will the customer be different in not just emotional ways, but super practical ways. So I want to put a nice bow on this for folks. So it's been a great conversation. I'll let you go and do the thought exchange to wrap this up. But from my end, what I hope folks take away is when we look at that first thought exchange and balancing and this push-pull between, I want to have a higher purpose, I want to hit the numbers today, your answer to that is not this either or paradigm. Your answer to that is, how will the customer be different as a result of doing business with us? What's my noble purpose with this customer? The data tells us if you put yourself on that and you put your team on that, you will close bigger deals, you'll close stickier deals, and in a lot of cases, you will shorten your sales cycle because you've just eliminated a lot of waste. You've focused in on how's the customer going to be different. That's the essence of selling with noble purpose.
Goosebumps. Well done, Lisa. Okay, so let's go. We have 10 minutes left. I'm going to jump back into our second exchange. We promised at the start insight, connection, and inspiration. So let's see if we can summarize all three of those in this next exchange. We'll put 4 minutes on the clock. Here is the exchange. After this session, I will. Short, sweet, to the point. Same strategy. Drew will put a link in the chat, so feel free to go click on the link or just pull out your phone and open up the camera, hover over that QR code. Should be easier the second time around. And Lisa, if you want to make some comments here, some of the introverts really appreciate the silence here so that they can actually think at this moment and share a thought, but welcome any additional thoughts around some of what's coming up here.
I'm glad that folks are ask the game-changing question. I can tell you after 10 years in this space, the reason we call it the game-changing question is because that's the shift. You'll get a very quick win off of that. The next phase after that is name and claim your own noble purpose for your sales team. That might take a little longer. Doesn't have to take that long. We've got a book, Selling with Noble Purpose, tells you exactly how to do it. But if you ask that game-changing question, that first question, that's where you'll get a super quick win.
Order the book. Ask how the customer will be different, rethink some of the opportunities sense.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting as I'm reflecting even on our organization, you hear this. I've heard it a lot actually over the last 5-6 months in the pandemic, which is, you know, from my colleague saying purpose is so important at this time when you're in a crisis, to we've heard, what is our overall purpose? And it's amazing how you can just take even ownership of your purpose within the work that you're even doing by asking that one powerful, super powerful question. And not to say that it deflects us as a team to do that work as well, but it's something that you can then own yourself of as I'm going through. And imagine the shift actually the leader can have on the team by asking that question. So where it goes from, I almost see sometimes rinse, lather, repeat as, I also see it as a very positive thing. Sometimes it can be like the grind, but if you're in the right, I guess, washing machine, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, the rinse, lather, repeat, it's like, this is so good. I get up every day and I'm really excited.
And I'm
just that shift of the leader saying, you know, how, Lisa, will this customer or partner be different after we do work with them?
Everything moves. So this is what we call, it's the 1 day, 1 year question. Every day you ask it, you get a better answer, you get good answers and point your team in the right direction. What we've experienced with our clients is if you consistently ask it, you will probably have a product breakthrough within the course of a year. If you can consistently ask that question of your product development team, your customer facing people, almost every client we've worked with has had a product development breakthrough, because instead of saying, how can we adjust our widget? They're saying, how will the customer be different? And that then creates the dialogue that'll create a product breakthrough. So that's why we say it's 1 day and 1 year. Yeah, start asking it the first day. You dramatically affect the sales behavior and you increase organizational alignment. I love these questions on here. One thing I do want to draw people's attention to that question does is you kind of have 3 levels of coaching you can do. You can say to your sales team, close it, close it, close it. You can say to your sales team, and in which case, if you got a pretty good sales team, you'll get some business. You can say, focus on the customer. That's better. But if you ask, how will the customer be different as a result of doing business with us? Those are those top tier noble purpose sellers that go beyond just pleasing customers. They are about improving customers in meaningful ways. And that's what drives that peak performance.
Great. I had an experience I'm reflecting on too. Back in February, we used our platform to ask what were the stories that were, you know, purposeful stories that were making a difference that we needed to share with everybody. And then you got to rate, and then whoever's thought was at the top got to then give, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of fame to share out that story. I knew the customer story that was the top one, but the person who ended up writing the thought was a different person who sold, and I knew who sold the deal, was a different person that got up and shared that story. And I thought to myself, oh my, this is it. This is so powerful. When I was expecting the person who sold that client and partnered with that client to be the one telling the story. And then it was somebody else in the organization that got up and shared this story like it was their own. I said, oh, that's it. How do we do that more of where, because some people are like, I don't have this story. I haven't experienced that. But then hearing the story and like, I can tell that story of, I'm inspired to go do biotech work now. If I can help the little old grand lady that can go see her family in this, you know, in this particular time.
And that's what's important. What you capture there is one of the things you can do as a leader is share what we call the customer impact stories. Stories build belief. Stories about how we closed a deal may be instructive, but stories about how we made a difference to customers build belief. So if I hear that story from that other rep, we lift that story up at our national sales meeting. I now become more inspired to go do my work, which is very different because usually we lift up the stories of the wins, which often promote jealousy, or they, you know, maybe I want to get a better win than you. I mean, there's not a complete negative to sharing stories of the wins, but sharing stories of how we made a difference to a customer build belief in everyone. And they bring the team together at this time when people are very disparate in their work. So like you said, you want to go out and sell that drug now. So I'll let you close us out then.
Well, a couple things. I just posted your LinkedIn. There's three, again, the last slide first was an inspiration I had at a previous organization, which is the end of the movie. If you actually share out the end of the movie or parts of the end of the movie, then people are more apt to be engaged throughout. So we did that at the start. If you remember, it's insight, insight and expertise, connection, and inspiration. I'm feeling all three of those, of how I can sign up as a better leader for all three of those. Hopefully everybody else is as well. So you walked away with that. From a connection perspective, we didn't have Zoom connection rooms. So this is the first one in the series. We're doing another one with Lisa. I'm really proud to say October 27th, sign up on our website. We're gonna do breakout rooms where you will get to get even more of a connection. But if not, make sure you connect in with myself and or with Lisa. We'd love to have further the conversation from there, get the book. And yeah, thank you again, Lisa. This is, I knew I would have some goosebumps throughout this conversation, and I absolutely did, and appreciate you taking the time to share so many great insights on how we can all sell and lead with noble purpose. And now more than ever, it's really important.
Thanks, such a pleasure.
Yeah.
We're at a moment in time where people are really deciding why they work and what they're working for. And the organizations that can really capture this sense of noble purpose will win with their employees and their customers. It's crucial.
Beautiful, perfect. We are on time. Lovely. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you all too. Bye.
Bye-bye.